The views and content expressed on the Pop Culture Courtroom are provided solely for educational and entertainment purposes and do not constitute legal advice. For any legal matters, please consult with a licensed attorney.
Welcome back to the Pop Culture Courtroom. I'm Matt Hardin, and today with us we have a very special guest. This is Jason Creech. Jason and I went to law school together many years ago. I started there in 1998, the year Tennessee won the national title game.
It was a good year.
It was a good year. And have been very good friends ever since then. Jason is a family law attorney at Hunter Smith & Davis up in the Tri-Cities and has driven to us to take part of our podcast here today. So welcome, Jason.
Hey, it's country mouse come to the big city here, as they say.
That's particularly amusing because I grew up in Cookeville, Tennessee, in a smaller town, and Jason grew up in
Charlotte, North Carolina. A city much like Nashville.
But some of us, advance and become the city mice, and some of us go back to their roots to become country mice.
It's a simple life, but we try.
So today we're going to be talking about Napoleon Dynamite. Napoleon Dynamite was a movie that came out in the early 2000s, and it involves the main character, Napoleon, who is a high school student in Preston, Idaho, near where the director of this film, Jared Hess, grew up. And he took many of the incidents of his childhood and wrapped them into this movie. He has said that he took some of the nerdier portions of his own life and put them into Napoleon. So Napoleon is a kind of geeky character who's not having the best of times in high school, lives with his grandmother on her farm with his older brother, Kip, who's 31, who appears to have some pretty significant arrested development.
For sure. And I think this movie really speaks to a universal theme, and that is the awkwardness of growing up, especially between those middle school and high school years, where pretty much everybody either was or felt awkward at a place, like they weren't cool. And we can all kind of relate to the journeys and the struggles that they go through in this movie.
Well, and all the major characters in this film that are on, I would call Team Napoleon, Pedro, Deb, and even the adults, Uncle Rico and Kip, are all trying to find their way in a world where they don't particularly fit in real well.
And despite their challenges and setbacks, they all are trying to improve themselves to some degree. And Napoleon is really kind of caught in the middle of all of these other people, and he's not necessarily trying to improve himself at the beginning of the film, but through the power of his friendships and connections with these other people, by the end, he does become that better version of himself and kind of blossoms with the final dance scene.
This movie struck me as I rewatched it that they are so true to their strangeness, and there's not some great arc where they metamorphosize out of it and become something else, which we'll talk about more in Irrelevant Evidence later. The theme being you, but better.
Right. And another item we'll touch upon later is the fact that Napoleon has a non-traditional family structure. The parents are completely absent. We don't know where they are, what their situation is, whether they're dead, whether they're in prison. This uncle comes in, given authority to act on their behalf by the grandmother, who we believe has custody or some sort of authority over their day-to-day lives, despite the fact that he has an older brother who's clearly emancipated. It would be the next logical candidate to be the man of the house. So they have an unusual family structure that sets the tone of the movie as well.
It does. We're going to talk about a few incidents from this movie today. First one being when Uncle Rico has come in to watch over Kip and Napoleon after their grandmother breaks her coccyx at the dunes riding motorcycles with her boyfriend and their aunt and her boyfriend. To set this up, Uncle Rico spends a great deal of this movie thinking about 1982, back when he was in high school playing high school football as the quarterback. We see him with his full-size camcorder at the VHS tape, often throwing football. He shows his video to Napoleon and Kip, where he's basically like a sidearm flinging football.
Every good player is going to get work in the film room.
Yeah, and I've seen some, unfortunately, some quarterbacks 10 years ago or so at UT that, I think that Uncle Rico could have beat out. And that's saying something.
Yeah, that's going to go to a very depressing place there.
Right. So we're happy with our team now.
For sure.
So Uncle Rico comes in, and part of the plot here is that they eat steak quite a bit. Grandma appears to have a working ranch, although we never see anybody working on it. Her scofflaw grandchildren don't seem to help much. Napoleon's griping about even feeding their pet llama, Tina, but it appears to be a well-kept farm. Lyle comes over at one point. Lyle works at the chicken farm, but he comes over to get some more steak by killing the cow before it's butchered, which he does in front of a school bus full of children.
Traumatizing them forever, likely.
We have a number of injury incidents in this movie. Our Matt Hardin Law firm does all injury cases. Jason's firm that he works at does a lot of things, but his specialty is in family law. So we're going to look at a couple of these injury incidents, starting with the steak incident. So Uncle Rico is on the front porch of Grandma's house, reminiscing about his days throwing the pigskin, and picks up Kip's steak, and from about 50 feet away throws a perfect steak throw, pops Napoleon in the face, knocks his glasses off, comes off the bike. I mean, it's a great throw.
Yeah, and he actually says, "Watch this," to Kip before he does it. So he's calling a shot before he throws the steak.
100% premeditated. So we can look at a couple of different type of actions in that. Now, what's interesting about it is this actor, John Grease, who plays Uncle Rico in this very well, may have played some football in his youth, but his main sport was baseball. He actually played some college baseball, so it makes sense that he could make an accurate throw. Apparently, it only took him 4 takes of this to hit him with Kip's steak.
So square in the head.
The delight of wearing glasses, with the greasy steak popping in the face, cutting Napoleon's face open. He has a injury from this. It's not a serious one, but was definitely what we call an intentional act. Homeowners insurance is going to cover injuries often to third parties that are, say, a visitor to your house. You have a friend over and your uncle hits them in the face with a steak and they have to get some medical care for it. There may be some coverage to, cover medical bills, pain and suffering, things like that. Those insurance policies are basically contracts, and though most people don't go and read the pages and pages of terms in those contracts, it has basically every scenario you can think of as to what specifically is covered with the insurance and what is not covered. So injuries that are intentional, meaning that you did it on purpose like Uncle Rico did, even if that had been a guest, here if he'd hit Pedro instead of Napoleon and injured him, even if it's a guest to the property, if you did it on purpose, your homeowner's insurance isn't going to cover that. Homeowner's insurance is designed to cover things more like, say you've got a dog that has bitten somebody on your property that you may have known had some vicious propensities. Well, that would get covered. Pedro gets bit. If you're a family member, though, most of the time it's not going to have coverage at all. Family member meaning the person who lives in the house in this scenario. So if you're on a ladder and painting and you fall off and break your coccyx there at home, there's not going to be likely coverage in that homeowner's insurance for you versus if you had somebody maybe a painter there that you let borrow your ladder that's defective and they fall, there probably would be coverage. 2 parts of that are the intentional act itself is going to negate that. And then on the other side, do you think Uncle Rico has any good coverage or assets for us to go after?
Well, the only assets we know from the film are an incredibly antiquated van, a tripod, and a very old school VHS loaded camera, which I can't imagine would have very much value. So good luck enforcing your judgment if you got one.
Oh, how dare you besmirch that sweet, sweet van. I mean, it's amazing to me that it doesn't have the desert mural and like with the wolf howling at the moon.
So that seems to be a classic of that genre for sure.
In this case, it serves as Uncle Rico's de facto home. Those old vans, I had a friend who had growing up whose mom had one of those that they took camping as their secondary vehicle. And it had this really sweet, like double bed area up above where the driver was. And then the seats down below would fold into another bed. So, I mean, my suspicion is this is a relic of Uncle Rico's high school days. It's a 1975 van. Uncle Rico's likely had that since back in 82.
Well, again, even the vehicle he drives ties into that sense of arrested development for this whole family that just permeates every male character at least.
There's one other incident I'll mention that relates to the insurance issue we talked about a minute ago. So we've got grandmom and her coccyx, and we're only looking at this from a civil side. We're not looking at the criminal side of things where Uncle Rico, assaulting Napoleon, where there potentially could be a case. But again, this is rural Idaho. And I think most of a jury would think that Napoleon needs to man up for a little banter with his uncle and his brother.
And I would imagine most jurors don't want to get in the middle of family matters. They're going to understand that there are dynamics and relationships that way predate any sort of incident that they're going to be dealing with.
That's right. So that incident with Grandma's coccyx is interesting to me because she's riding a four-wheeler, or they say she is, but you see her, and then it cuts to what clearly is a dude stunt person that's actually going over and falling off while doing a spread eagle on the middle of the air.
Best editing.
Now, they did have that $400,000 budget, so maybe we cut them a little slack on that. So that injury, I mean, I've had many clients that have had a broken coccyx in car wreck cases. That injury is one where you can't do a lot about it. I mean, typically they're going to give folks an inflatable pillow and tell you to rest until it heals up some, and you're at home watching TV or playing on the internet or whatever until it heals up. And in this one, they send off Grandma to the hospital, where it feels more like probably a plot device so we can get Uncle Rico living in the house with them.
I would say that's probably right.
Case or no case, as far as the coccyx case, this is a similar issue as before that we talked about, where if you have injured yourself, you likely have no case whatsoever unless there's some other mechanism that's at fault for it, like a defective product or something like that. But here, Grandma is riding that four-wheeler on the dunes. She goes up too steep a place, apparently doesn't put her weight forward, and then falls off the back of it. There's not going to be any insurance coverage for that. It's not even an actionable case. I mean, there's nothing you can do about that. There may be some medical coverage that'll cover some of your injuries, depending on what kind of insurance she has, but there's no case related to that part.
Well, and again, I think your jury pool will be made up of people who are from there, who know what the dunes are like. They know the rural area, and they're probably going to say, you know what, that's on you.
And as far as the stake in the face, in addition to being highly amusing, where I cannot imagine a jury of 12 people or so hearing that without laughing. I had a jury trial back years ago when I lived in Memphis. This is back when I was still a defense lawyer before I started doing plaintiff stuff, and the woman who claimed injury, who had a back injury, she had a real back injury, claimed that it affected her singing career. This was not Taylor Swift or Carrie Underwood or something. It was just some lady that was older that, still would like to be a singer. She asked if she could play this jury in Memphis one of her songs. We made no objection to that and said, sure, you can do that. And then she
How'd that go?
When 2/3 of your jury is laughing, I mean, I think that's not a great way to really start your case. So here we have the steak in the face. I mean, mostly what I was wondering about during that was, I wonder what cut of meat that is.
I just thought, what a waste of steak.
Is that a sirloin? He does not take his own steak. He grabs Kips and throws it with that perfect throw. But ultimately, there's no case there either. Napoleon had very minor injuries. If he had gone to the hospital, it's possible that he would have an injury case against Uncle Rico, but it's a bad injury case. It mostly just hurt his feelings and his glasses. Where I come down on that is that's not enough to pursue a case. So I'm saying no case on that. And you could potentially do a criminal case if the sheriff of that area is anything like the other outlying characters, tough farmers and folks like that, they're going to laugh it off and do nothing.
Well, another issue is, even if there is a case, this is one family member against a minor. Who would even bring a case like that?
I think that's a perfect segue into the custody issue in this case. One thing that's interesting about that situation to me related to the steak injury case is that Napoleon is a minor who appears to be under the custody of his grandmother. So a couple of things I think would be interesting to talk about is, one, grandparent custody, and then two, who would bring the case on behalf of a minor, as minors are not allowed to bring cases on their own?
Well, as you know, as is the natural order of things, parents have superior rights over their children, both to raise them, to manage their property, their estate, things of that nature. But one of the great mysteries of this film is that the parents are completely absent. There's no reference to them. You don't see them. You don't even see any pictures of them on the wall anywhere. No one talks about them. So it is somewhat of an unknown as to who has legal authority over Napoleon. I think the clear implication is that grandma has custody, and that could come from a number of ways. The parents could be deceased, in which case the grandmother could adopt Napoleon, and in the eyes of the law, she would be the parent. The parents could be incapacitated or absent, either in prison or maybe have some drug usage, in which case the grandmother could bring a custody case and be given primary custody, but it wouldn't eliminate the parents from the situation. It would give her a temporary legal authority that would continue until and unless the parents came back and proved to the court that they were fit to be able to pick up the mantle of their parental rights from that point forward.
Do you think it's possible that the parents are in jail related to a stake throwing incident?
We may, we may never know. Gets back to the nature versus nurture argument.
So we are both lawyers in Tennessee. A lot of this law will apply in other states because they tend to be somewhat similar, especially in family law type issues. Is there such thing as a like grandparent visitation rights?
There are visitation rights for grandparents in Tennessee, but they're under certain circumstances. You can't just be a grandparent, walk in and say, I want court ordered visitation. One of the most common ways, of course, is where one parent's deceased and another parent is adversarial to a grandparent, in which case a grandparent can say, it's in the best interest of the child for our relationship to continue over and above the superior rights of the lone parent. There are other scenarios, but that's the most common one. But visitation rights are separate and apart from custody and parental rights, the ability to make decisions for children, like where they go to school, health care, etc.
Is there a situation where someone like Kip, who's 31 years old, would be under the custody of an adult or a grandparent?
Well, those situations, if they're emancipated, meaning they're above 18, typically, if they're not able to care for themselves or manage their own affairs, in those situations, they'd have a conservatorship set up. And that's where a judge has another person act on behalf of that person for all intents and purposes. And you have a conservatorship of the person and of the purse, is what they say. And so, of the person, you're making decisions for that person as to how they live their life, where they live, their expenses. Conservatorship of the purse is where that person is helping manage their affairs, their estate, their money, because they're not able to for some reason. So, among the things with either custody or conservatorship is the ability to make decisions for somebody else. And so, for example, in the example we gave earlier, where there could be a compensable claim, who would bring that claim?
A lot of it's going to depend on what age Napoleon is. We don't ever see him driving. He does appear to be over 16 at this age, but he goes around mostly on bicycle. Kip is 31 years old. Is he on rollerblades, I believe, when he's being pulled into town to go to the Rex Kwon Do
Yes.
orientation. So if Napoleon is underage, it can be brought by his grandmother or another adult as a next friend of his, meaning on his behalf. The case would be brought. If Kip is under conservatorship, the conservator can bring the case on Kip's behalf if something had happened to him. However, if during the course of the lawsuit Napoleon turns 18, he can actually start handling his own case, even though the corpus of the case is going to be something that happened before he reached the age of majority.
So this would be the case even if the parents were actually alive, but the grandmother has custody?
If you have the situation which you probably face in your world where a couple has gotten divorced and they have minor children, and say there's a car wreck that the minor child is involved in, it's typically going to be a race to the courthouse, and does dad file it first or does mom file it first on behalf of the child? But it's that negligence claim belongs to the child. And so if that happens, mom or dad hires the lawyer. It's said mom on behalf of minor child is next friend, or language that's similar to that. If there's a recovery, you actually have to get a court approval for it, because if you're under the age of 18, you cannot legally contract in Tennessee. And so the court has to give approval to it, to bless it, and that way the releasing parties, the person that caused the injury, is actually released. And the court is overlooking, especially in a situation like here where you have people that appear to be poor and don't have a lot of money. Sometimes you may be put in a situation where the parent is going to want to use that money just for day-to-day living, when that money legally belongs to the child. So sometimes the court will order that money be placed in an account at the clerk's office to get interest until the child turns 18, or invested or used somehow on their behalf. Now, court can make orders if the family comes up with something reasonable to do with the money, like, we want to put it in a college fund, or, the child needs to be able to get a car when they're 16, because otherwise they're going to be on rollerblades and a bicycle. get car insurance for them, that type of thing. But the court has a lot of leeway on what to approve. I mean, they even have to approve the attorney fees if we're on the case to show that we're charging a reasonable amount it's all designed to protect the child.
In family law, we say the judge is the third parent. They act in what's called in loco parentis, which is a Latin phrase for in the place of the parent.
That makes sense. We're now going to move into irrelevant evidence. We're going to talk about Napoleon Dynamite in the sense of how it is a 1980s movie, as well as how it looks at the trope of the 1980s movie where you have the caterpillar becoming the butterfly and going under some metamorphosis where the dorky character becomes a cool character one way or another. I tend to think of movies in that vein, like Can't Buy Me Love, which is a movie that is about a high school kind of dorky guy that wants to be a cool kid, so he pays a cheerleader $1,000 to pretend to date him for some number of weeks, and she helps him with his fashion, gives him a new haircut, and then all the cool kids like him, and eventually it works out where she actually becomes his girlfriend in real life. Weird Science is a John Hughes movie where they figure out a way with a mid-1980s computer
Cutting edge technology.
to go with the Frankenstein story where this beautiful woman, Kelly LeBrock, comes to help them, transform into a bit of cooler characters as well. This movie, do you see that metamorphosis happen?
Not really, but I do see all the main characters trying to improve themselves with various things. So, for example, Uncle Rico is trying to have a business. Kip is trying to find his soulmate. Pedro tries to run for class president. Napoleon Dynamite is kind of stuck in neutral with his life, but by the power of his friendship, he does find his own message, his own delivery for himself in the dance-off for the skit at Pedro's election party.
I don't know that any of these characters change very much throughout the movie. They don't have the true 1980s total transformation that you see in lots of other films. But what they do is a bit of a riff on that, where it's these very strange characters who become stronger by being the best version of their dorky selves with friendships. And it seems to make every one of their lives better one way or another. If you watch this film without the ID card, the 2004, 2005 Preston High School Napoleon Dynamite, you don't really know when the time period of it is. It feels like a 1980s movie, but it's somewhat timeless. You don't see new vehicles going around. I mean, you can start with the music. Our first scene of the film, we hear a White Stripes song that came out in the early 2000s. There's a Happy Hands group,
The Happy Hands Club,
which Napoleon is somehow the only male member of.
which sort of adds to the awkwardness for sure.
So during their initial portion of that I believe they're doing it to the Bette Midler song, The Rose, which is another 80s song. You end up later, the second time you see him is when Summer Wheatley's running for class president and they do a Backstreet Boys song.
Yeah, and you've got some time markers. They have dial-up internet, and they use a cassette for Napoleon's dance. And Uncle Rico wants to go back to 1982. So you have some time markers, but you don't really know where in a very wide range of time this movie takes place. And I think that's probably intentional.
They have so many Easter eggs in this movie about the 1980s. I mean, even in the time machine itself, it's got crystals, which, the use of crystals is a 1980s thing. The time machine itself is made up of what appears to be some electrical equipment, a plug, and then the clear crystals that they put in there. And does that time machine seem to work well to you?
Well, no, it's comically bad. Comically bad. I mean, we all know at this point that it takes 1.21 gigawatts of power to run a time machine, and they're plugging into a standard home socket, which is maybe pushing 120 volts.
It's not enough. You need a bolt of lightning.
You definitely, but the problem is you never know when and where a bolt of lightning will occur.
Or some plutonium. So, I mean, Uncle Rico doesn't seem to have access to the plutonium the way that the doctor did in Back to the Future, which came out in 1985, 3 years after Uncle Rico failed. So he should have known that what he really needed instead of that van was a DeLorean.
That's right.
Some plutonium and a flux capacitor. And then he gets to relive his high school glories, maybe throw a little tighter spirals to those receivers.
Although you got to wonder if that van could even get up to 88 miles an hour.
I'm thinking, no way that thing can get up to 88 miles an hour here, 30 years after a 30-year-old van.
That's right.
So, yeah, I agree with you on that. He definitely is not choosing a very, very good method to try to go back to the future here and or go back in time to 1982. As a matter of fact, we have here Uncle Rico has already electrocuted himself. It's believed that Kip has also electrocuted himself, and when Napoleon asked him, Kip, as the big brother here, is only too happy to hook up all their apparatus on Kip, or Kip is hooking it on Napoleon, and lets him electrocute himself too.
Well, if you watch the movie, he actually asks, "Have you guys tried this?" And Kip gives a very disingenuous no. I think he just outright lied to his brother for the sake of inflicting pain upon him.
So while there, is an injury lawyer, what I initially think is a product liability claim. Do I believe that a fly-by-night time machine creator from Florida who shipped this off to Idaho has sufficient assets to sue them and to have a judgment be paid off? I do not.
Well, they clearly had enough time, energy, and resources to develop that very professional product guide involving putting the crystals in and putting the T-handle in your lap. That's some pretty intense engineering going on there.
I think it's just basically a big shot to the crotch from the electricity and that stuff. That's really all the machine's accomplishing there.
Yeah, it's really cruel, both from the person who made and sold the time machine to take advantage of the weak, as well as cruel by Kip to try to electrocute his brother.
Well, Kip is in no big hurry for something that may kill his brother to turn that off at all.
Yeah, I wonder if we go back at how long did it take before he goes, kill power, before the plug is actually pulled.
I think it's quite a while. So all these things to tie it to the 80s, and so we end up having this Uncle Rico who apparently, led to the second place trophy for his high school. We don't really hear about how he played in the first three quarters when he's griping about coach not being put back in the fourth, but I'm thinking at least 3 interceptions, probably maybe a strip sack or fumble.
Well, we all tend to reinvent and romanticize the past to some degree, and he is certainly an amplification of both of those things.
Jason here still talks about a special at bat he had during law school intramurals, and that was over 20 years ago as well.
Well, in my defense, it did clear the fence. It was a home run and did lead to an intramural championship. Now, it was professor and graduate league, but still.
Yeah, that 180-foot fence. I mean, we've got, we want to feel good about ourselves.
Yes, pretty much.
It all works. Ultimately, in this film, everybody gets to a better place. We have Napoleon, who has faced some of his bullies along the way and appears to have a burgeoning relationship with Deb. They play tetherball together. You then have Pedro, who has managed to unite the lower classes of the school that maybe don't have as easy a time as the cool kids like Summer and that crew. You have the dance that's done by Napoleon, which probably can be seen as his biggest moment in the film. The film is very expensive. They only had about 10 minutes of film left, so they actually did 3 takes of this scene based on which songs they could potentially get. The whole movie was made for about $400,000. $200,000 was paid to get that Jamiroquai song "Canned Heat" during that big moment. And John Hader was told they did a couple other, maybe a Michael Jackson song, which I can't imagine how much that would have cost, and a different Jamiroquai song. And then they pieced together parts of these 3 dances he did over like 10 minutes, and then they ran out of film, so they had to use it.
It's amazing. And what a return on investment. I understand it made over $46 million, at least, off of a shoestring budget.
And John Hader's original salary for that, you know what it is?
I'm going to say $1,982.
That's super close, but fortunately, Price is Right rules of $1,000. And he successfully negotiated later some percentage, I think, of the profits. But everybody that's doing this, maybe it's a labor of love. I mean, you could look at the credits at the end, and they list all the high school students that are actually Preston high school students that are in. It's like over 180 kids. So Deb gets friends, which I think is her successful deal. Pedro gets to be president of the class, and it's really nice to kind of see these kids that are outcasts get a little confidence and a little belief in themselves. And then ultimately, your alias in this film, our man Kip, gets the love of LaFonda, this woman that he's fallen in love with on the internet, and they end up having a scene at the after the credits, which after the movie was successful, it was filmed later on. You know, they brought all these folks back together to show the wedding of Kip and LaFonda with her brother, you know, not loving that she's marrying Kip. Napoleon coming in on a wild horse that he's tamed for the occasion. And Jason, I've the years I've known you, I remember you may be able to do a Kip impression for us today. Can you give us a little bit of that?
Well, I don't know. It's been so many years, I'm a little rusty, but I guess you could say things are getting pretty serious here.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today on the Pop Culture Courtroom. Thanks to Jason Creech for coming over from Kingsport to be our guest star today. And we will see you all next time.
Peace out.
The Pop Culture Courtroom is a Matt Hardin Law production.
If you're a loved one that's been injured in a car wreck or other personal injury incident, call the law firm, the Tennesseans Trust.
Visit matthardinlaw.com or call 615-200-1111 for your free consultation today.